Be intentional with your children. And it gets overused, but it's a good word. You guys are making an intentional effort to better yourselves so that you can better protect, better teach everybody on your teams. And so I appreciate it. I thank you for that. I also want to thank a couple other people. Since I am the last speaker, I'm going to be thankful. You're going to be thankful that I'm the last speaker as well. But I want to thank some behind-the-scenes people. You know, Chuck has mentioned it a little bit, but he's really just the poster child of all this. It's really Marion that makes it everything run. And thank you, Marion. So, I also want to throw a shout out to Ben and Reagan behind the booth. Thank you, guys. It's, you know, we carry the guns, we're the protectors, but it's all the behind the scenes people that make everything we do work. And so I'm really grateful for that. And one last shout out that's going to take some group interaction. It was mentioned earlier, but I'm going to mention it again. Today is Megan Beatty's birthday. And not only is she spending her birthday here, hang on, we're going to sing. But she's spending her birthday here. Her husband's deployed to another country. And so how grateful are we that she's taking the time and being intentional to be here. So stand up, Megan. Be birthdayed. All right, let's sing. Happy birthday. There you go. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. That's probably the worst birthday singing you will ever have. You're welcome. All right, so we're going to talk about tactical awareness. And my goal this afternoon is to share with you some thoughts, some concepts on how to sharpen your awareness skills so that you can better protect your church, so that you can help your teams rethink how they might prepare for that unthinkable event that might happen to your church. Do you recall the scene and if you haven't seen this, shame on you, and you should. Do you recall the scene in the Jason Bourne movie, the first one, The Bourne Identity, in which Jason Bourne is sitting in the diner, and while wondering why he has 6 passports and why he's memorized all of the license plates in the parking lot, and why he can tell you that every person in their personality, his line of sight, all the exits, and who he can take and can't take. That was a pretty interesting scene for me when it came out years ago. And I had people ask me the question, is there really people that can do that? And the answer is yes, there are people that can do that. But the next question is, do you really need this kind of extraordinary awareness in your daily life, in your daily surroundings? The answer is probably no. However, you do need to better understand what awareness is about, how to get it, how to sharpen it, so that you can be prepared for that. Because it's not, as several people have mentioned, it's not a matter of if anymore, it's a matter of when something may happen in your church. But why? Why do we need to have that kind of preparedness? Well, I think the original awareness manual, the Bible, referenced that in 1 Peter. Be self-controlled and alert. That's a training thing. Be self-controlled and alert. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. It's a true statement. If we look at all the people, all the bad people that have done bad things, that's pretty much the devil prowling around looking for somebody to devour. He devoured them, they devoured others. But the main thing in here, besides the fact that the Satan is the ruler of this world, if you read the Bible, is that we need to be self-controlled and alert. Not running around as he said yesterday with our hair on fire, but self-controlled and alert. Mike's talk was basically entitled Strive or Settle. And I think a lot of times, even churches with security teams tend to settle a little bit once they have security in place. I know that apathy, complacency, and denial are the greatest barriers to true security awareness. And we get complacent. A lot of churches are apathetic. A lot of churches are in denial. God's got this. We don't need security. You know, we know everybody in the church. This is a peaceful church. We don't need this. Well, that's a very archaic thought process if you watch anything on the news. But it is also, we, again, tend to become complacent. Got a team in place. We did all this training. We're ready to go. We can handle anything until we can't. And it's when complacency sets in that we tend to become comfortable, lethargic even, and lazy. And that's what we're trying to get away from here, is getting out of the lazy. Complacency is very subtle. It moves in slowly, kind of like a fog bank, can suppress our potential without really realizing it. So we're going to get into this now. That was just kind of the setup, if you will. We're going to get into what this is all about. Situational awareness, as you know, is simply knowing what's going on around you at all times. This is not new. This is, you've heard this. So then we have to ask the question, what is tactical awareness? So tactical awareness is knowing what's going on around you all the time and having a plan, having one or more contingency plans on how to address any adverse situation that might happen. And I could tell you a lot of stories about how this unfolds in different churches. You probably experienced your own. The bad actors, if you will, that happen around us. But I want to say that tactical awareness is best summarized, and this is actually the kind of precursor to my little handout, as the cognitive assessment of a given space and the development and implementation of a planned response to an unusual event. Webster's tells us that a tactic is the art or skill of employing available means to accomplish an end. So that's what tactical is a learned skill, an available skill. We have an end in sight. How do we get there? So we take all the situational awareness, and that's great if we recognize it, but if we go, bad guy, what good does that do us? If we freak out, if we run out of the room with our hair on fire, it doesn't do any good. But if we have a plan, maybe I'm just eyes and ears, and this is something we can teach others. If I have a plan, my plan is simply to get on my radio. This is Bob. There's a guy in a trench coat. It's 110 degrees. You might want to take a look. That's a plan. That's his plan to go to the next level. So we need to have a plan in place at all times so that you're not only actively aware of your surroundings, but the uses of your surroundings. In various training scenarios, you're going to find that concealment, probably not a lot of cover in most churches, true cover, but you can find concealment. That may be part of your plan. How are you going to move around and use your surroundings? How do you use them currently? In our kids area, we have a downstairs, we have an upstairs. And I put somebody upstairs in the loft. We call it the sniper nest. But he can see literally everything below. And that's part of the plan. He's going to be the first one to spot somebody doing something weird because we're at ground level and everybody's the same, unless they're really, really tall. You're thinking, if this happens, I can take this action. Now we do, somebody else mentioned earlier, I think Mike, we do executive or pastoral protection. We have two pastors. We're unique in that way at Preston Trail. They started the church together. They take alternate weekends. It works great. I'm not sure it would work anywhere else. But we have a protection detail on each one of them. And we've been tested on what happens if, because if has happened. And what happens is they don't get any notice. We grab them, we move. One time we did have to evacuate, the only time. It turned out to be a false alarm, but we had never heard our alarm system, which was kind of weird, but we had a fire alarm. And all of a sudden, a voice like Alexa came aboard. You please need to evacuate. The building is on fire. And it was so soft that everybody's going, what? Nobody figured it out. It took about 5 seconds, and all of a sudden, well, crap, we need to evacuate. So pastor's and talking to somebody, and his guy's trying to kind of get him, and I just went up behind him and said, Paul, you're going. And we moved him. And then we evacuated the rest of the building. But you have to have that plan ready, and you have to practice it. You have to train in those scenarios so that you're not caught off guard. Here's what tactical awareness is not. And not to diminish anything Dan said earlier, it's not FBI profiling. I'm not asking you to be profilers. I'm not even going to try to teach you how. You need to read all 4 of those books and spend a week with him to understand that. It's not Homeland Security active shooter training. It's not even the TSA SPOT program. It's basically learning how to use the right tools to think outside the box and how to handle the situations. Because bad things happen. We know that. We need to be able to see, observe, and interpret the input that we're getting on a regular basis. If we just see it, that's great. But are we observing it as it really is? And I'm going to get more into that. And then how are we responding? If we're just responding by freezing, because we have fight or flight, right? But we also have freeze. And if you don't have the training, if you haven't thought about it ahead of time, you might have the tendency to freeze. So what are the steps? What are the necessary steps to develop and improve your tactical awareness? We have talked, Mike just talked about training. One of the things that I've noticed throughout this entire conference, until we got to Mike, and his was on physical training. And probably a lot of you do physical training. My team has a tactical Saturday every month. And we go out and we bring an outside trainer like he talked about, and we run through drills that we've never run through, and we fail. And hopefully we're learning each time. But what I'm talking about today, what was weaved in this whole conference between all the different speakers was training your brain. I don't remember who said it, but the brain is the greatest weapon we have. It's the greatest tool we have. We're all smarter than we realize. For all the men in the room, we're all smarter than our wives will tell us, but we have to train it. A lot of the stuff doesn't come naturally. Our brains can only process a small amount of information in any given second. We're bombarded moment by moment with new information in our brain. We've developed a lot of filters to filter out the stuff that we see and we hear. And so we block out a lot of the information. But our filters are based on prior experience, our family of origin, our upbringing, our training, who we are, what our likes and dislikes are. And so we might filter out some things that are real because we don't believe they're real. We make interpretations based on our filters sometimes, not on the facts. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the brain because Randy did that yesterday. But the amygdala is the one that controls emotional response. The thalamus is the input sensor. So I'm not going to dwell there much. We have a lot of distractions. And if you're on my team and I see you on a cell phone, you're probably not going to be on my team for long, because that's the biggest distraction ever. And I see people every day on the roads, phone right there, walking, driving, having conversations. My daughters will text each other from upstairs to downstairs. It gets a little ridiculous. But that is a huge distraction, but it's not the only distraction. Things in our mind. When you walk into church, are you clearing your mind? Are you leaving it behind? Are you now focused on your task ahead? We need to get rid of the distractions. And then we need to, so let's say we walk in church. All the distractions are aside. You've left your bad stuff at home. Your cell phone's put up so you won't be distracted by that. So now you need to figure out, what is my baseline? Everybody familiar with that term, baseline? So we've dealt with baselines our whole lives. Maybe we didn't call it that. But what is the norm right now? So my baseline here is, I've got about 20 tables filled with a bunch of guys and a couple of young ladies. That's my baseline. If all of a sudden I turned around and half the room was empty again, or maybe even more full, my baseline changed. That's an anomaly. So I have to be aware of those anomalies. Anybody heard of the book Left of Bang? Okay, it's a great book. It's a very deep book. It's all about the combat hunter profile for the Marines, is what it is, really. Patrick Van Horn, the author, said, identifying threats means establishing a baseline and looking for anomalies. A baseline is what is normal, for an environment, a situation, or an individual. So what we've been talking about the last 2 days is seeing those things that are abnormal. Dan went on about it, about the abnormal, and his little charts and all that I couldn't keep up with. But we need to continually reassess our baseline. We need to look at where our vulnerabilities are, our threats, and what our assets are. And in the middle of all that is what the risk is. If there's no risk, then we've got a good handle on all that. But there's a great possibility that there are risks. So everywhere you go, you need to assess your baseline. You're sitting in your living room, you're watching a movie. Your baseline is things are pretty quiet, right? But as Randy said, all of a sudden somebody's beating on your door. Well, that's an anomaly because you're not expecting it. So that just changed your baseline. Now, you may be reaching for your AR under the couch, or you may just go to the door and say, hey, who's there? Why are you banging on my door? But you have to be aware of what your baseline is before you can recognize an anomaly. So in my church, the main doors face east, and you walk in, and about 70 yards is our kids area. So last Sunday, I show up, that's my baseline. So that's the normal, that's my normal. Last Sunday, I showed up, and there's a 7x20 jam box right inside the front doors. I could no longer see the kids area, and from the kids area, I could no longer see the front. So I'm internally freaking out a little bit and wondering, how did this get here? Who put it here? And did they forget to ask or say anything about it? But this was a baseline changer. It didn't ruin the Sunday. It was a setup for this next Sunday. But it made me realign people and assets to where this was no longer an anomaly, but part of the baseline. But it was a challenge initially. But I had a plan. I had plenty of people. I just had to move them so that it was no longer a challenge for us. So you have to do that. Once you understand your baseline, be ready to move around it. This was discussed a little bit, but the understanding decision making, if I can learn how to use this. Again, we're talking about the brain. But we have to understand our own decision cycle so that we can understand others. You've heard this term before, the OODA loop, and it is truly that. And we all go through it in just about every decision. The OODA loop is a concept originally applied to combat operations, but now it's used in law enforcement, it's used in security, it's used in just about everything. USA Air Force Colonel John Boyd created it, and basically it goes through 4 stages. Observe, orient, decide, and act. And we do this with every new piece of information. And I'm not going to get into this separately, but when you talk about verbal judo, or when you talk about diffusing a situation, if you understand how this works, if you understand what the OODA loop is, and how you really process information and understand the decision cycle, you can break somebody else's OODA loop. And it will stop a potentially violent process. I did this recently. I put my hand on my gun twice, ever, in my job and at church. And I had done this once, and stand up for me. This guy, everybody thought, here we go, it's gonna be a gunfight. But he finally realized he was surrounded. So he got out, and he's just going off on me. He is telling me all these horrible things. And I'm listening to it, and I'm trying to not be up in his face, and I'm like, where did you get that shirt? That is awesome. It broke his OODA loop. He didn't know how to respond to that. You can sit down. It threw him, and then he started telling me, well, I got it at Target, But it broke him out of that cycle of anger to where he could calm down. And it gave us a moment to kind of figure out. And then I was able to talk him through some other things of like, you seem really angry. Are you angry at me? Well, no, I don't know you. Okay, so then we could calm it down because we broke his OODA loop of, I'm pissed off at the world and I'm taking it out on your church. But we have to collect the information. We have to analyze it. We have to determine our course of action. We have to act. Now, I could have acted a whole lot differently. I could have just thrown him on the ground and handcuffed him. Everybody around me would have been going, bravo, bravo, thank you. But I chose not to. So we have to do these things quickly and instantly and be able to process that information quickly as well. Because you continue to cycle through this with everything, whether you realize it or not. And the results are going to have an impact, good or bad. So it really depends on how you deal with that. So with that, I want to move to the next part of that decision-making process, and that is the 360-degree thinking process. Not only seeing everything in front of you, and some of us have really great peripheral vision, and maybe you can see about 140 degrees pretty well, but we also need to develop hindsight, eyes in the back of our head, foresight, being able to see the future, which we really can't, and insight. And in order to do that, we have to get out of the whole, I'm just looking here, here's my post, I'm just looking at this. We have to start looking around differently. We have to observe, I don't know about you, but most of the time I'm on the ground floor at our church and I'm scanning a crowd and I'm looking at things. I'm looking at what Mike, I think it was Mike said, whatever you said first, hands, waist, and demeanor. What was the first thing? Whole body. Yeah, whole body. I don't do that. I need to add that. But so I'm looking at that. That's not 360-degree thinking. What I need to be doing is not only looking at you, but looking who's next to you, who's behind you. And then I need to look up. What's going on up? If he's distracting me, is there something going on up here? Is there something going on way over here? It's a complete circle that we need to be gaining understanding of what's happening around us. It is a mindset. You've heard that a couple times today. Nate Dogg, if he's in the room, referenced it, as did Randy. A mindset is a different thing than a skill. To me, a skill is something you can learn, you can practice. A mindset is kind of a change, a paradigm shift. And so we need to be aware of our mindset. Our world is not linear. Our world is round, spherical. So it doesn't just go on in front of us. It goes on the sides, behind us. We need to be aware of everything that's going on. Who all here drives a car? Most of you, okay. Who all here drives on 635? LBJ, any highway? Okay. There's a lot of idiots out there, aren't there? Yes, they are. And they're out to get us. I'm pretty convinced of that. But when we're driving, we're pretty much doing this. If you're a good driver, we're looking in a rearview mirror. We've got side mirrors. I know when I'm backing out of a space, even though I've got all these mirrors, I'm also doing this to make sure that I'm not going to hit something or somebody. And so we're already doing this, but we're only doing it in a very limited capacity. And so if we can break out of that and do it in a greater capacity in the world around us, I think that you're going to find yourself thinking differently, seeing things differently, and moving differently, and responding differently. In order to do that, though, and here we get into the psychological. By the way, I was telling them, I had a couple of psych classes in school, but I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a professional psychology anything. I've just learned through trial and error. But I'm going to ask you, what do you see when you look out? What do you see? Are you really seeing what's in front of you? Or are you seeing what you think you're seeing? Trick question, right? Observation is more than just simply looking at something, but rather a mental process involving both visual and thought to determine what is really in front of you. We all see things in a different light. We see things through different lenses. The great theologian Sherlock Holmes said, "You see, but you do not observe." The distinction is clear. We can see all day long, but if we're not really observing what's going on, we can be looking at somebody and not really observing that they're hurting, they're angry, they have something in their hands, they're hiding something. So we need to really observe, not just see. I don't know about you, but 2020, when we all had to wear a mask, I couldn't see anybody's faces. That kind of freaked me out for a minute because I was used to looking at some faces, recognizing people. Are they smiling? Are they frowning? Are they about to shoot me? I couldn't tell. It was a little disturbing. We all see things through different lenses. And my lens all of a sudden was cloudy because everybody was wearing a mask. But further, we see things through different lenses in that my new friend Brian and I don't know if you know, but he's a little darker than me. Well, he has some different biases than I do just because of the way he was raised. Did you have two parents? I had one. Different bias. Where'd you grow up? Memphis. Never been there, but I hear they have great barbecue. But I grew up with a single mom in an area of town she couldn't afford so that I could have a good school. I never saw her. I raised myself. I had no rules. I was the child that they were talking about earlier. I was that bad actor waiting to happen. Luckily, I had some great Christian people in my life to help me turn around. But all that to say, I've got a different filter than you do. I've got a different filter than you do. Why? Because he's probably 2 or 3 years older than I am, right? Okay, well, Mike's probably 2 or 3 years younger than I am. Different filter. They were playing some music earlier. Everybody at my table laughed at me because I'd never heard these songs because it wasn't on my radio station, which is classic rock. Different filter. So when we see people, things, and places, we have to recognize that we have a different filter. We're seeing things through a different lens. I'm not asking you, all of us to be in the same lens, looking through the same pair of glasses, but we need to recognize that that is different. So I'm going to give everybody a test. I want to prove my point. And I'm using, what's your name? James. James, you are going to be my lab rat today. All right. You can sit right there. So, funny side story. Has anybody seen the meme? It's got two mice talking to each other. One mice says to the other, "Have you had the vaccine yet?" And the other mice says, "No, I'm waiting till it's out of human trials." Okay, so different perspective. I'm going to give you a test. I'm going to use, who was just up here? Dan. I'm going to use his 10-second rule, okay? I'm going to show you a picture for 10 seconds. Then I'm going to take it away, and I'm going to ask you a question, okay? Everybody ready? Go. What'd you see, James?
Lady, scarf, feather, like she looked kind of...
How old do you think she was?
She looked old.
Old?
Like,
So you saw an old lady with a scarf?
yes.
Okay, hang on a second. Who else saw an old lady? Okay, about half. What'd you see?
Basically the same thing.
Okay. Anybody see a young lady? Look at this. Again, about half the room. Okay, it's only one picture, right?
Two ladies.
There's two ladies. This guy's a genius. Okay, he's doing the next talk. There's one picture, but we have different lenses. We saw different things. Can anybody that saw the young lady now see the old lady? Struggle. I know it's a struggle. The old lady. Where you thought was the chin of the young lady is the nose of the old lady. Yeah, it's interesting. Kind of blows your mind that, oh, that's the same picture. Yet half the room saw a different picture. That's what I'm talking about. We see, but we don't observe. So we have to look at things differently than perhaps we have in the past. We have to understand what we see. If you're steering the Titanic, you see a chunk of ice. You don't see what's underneath. It's kind of the same with a personality. If I meet you and I don't know you, I'm only seeing the top of the iceberg, right? Because I see what you're showing me. I don't see the pain, the struggles, the education, the hurts and habits and hang-ups you might have. I'm seeing the top of the iceberg. So we have to look below sometimes. We also have to understand our perspective. If I'm a kid, this is fascinating to me. If I'm a cat, I'm looking for lunch. So we have to really understand What are we looking at? Again, different perspectives, different lenses. Once you recognize that, I think you might start to see some things differently. We have, in our world, we have truths. We have our own beliefs. And then we have some knowledge if we'll go get it, which will kind of put those two together. We have to be aware of what our beliefs are, as well as what we think the truths are. And we have to gain knowledge through asking the right questions and looking at the right information. We can't make presumptions. Presumptions will get people hurt. Presumptions will let bad things happen. We have to know. We have to start observing. We have to have tactical awareness of how we're going to handle these things. So we have to master this awareness mindset. We have to look at the past. What has happened in the past? You can read all kinds of studies. Here's what has happened in this situation. What's happening right now? What is my team doing? What are we looking at? And then you look in the future. What do we need to do differently? What do you need to go back and help your team understand differently than what they are right now? I've been straight up accused of having biases towards people, and it's true. I have to realign my thinking. Story, biases. That's about 2 years ago. Our pastors periodically will do something a little alarming to us as far as their sermons go. They usually tell us ahead of time that we might want to add a couple extra people because they might get a little controversial. So one of the pastors had done a sermon on basically the state of the terrorist threat, ISIS, and he was trying to get across, we can't be living in fear. And I don't remember what had happened to predicate this, but he was talking about this. And he was making some rough statements about terrorists. So we're all okay. Well, the next week, we're still a little bit on yellow alert. And this young lady who had been attending usually sat up in the balcony. We didn't think anything of her. She was kind of a loner, kind of quiet. And all of a sudden, as the pastor is closing down his sermon, and you could tell he's about to go to prayer because they kind of do that, she comes quickly down the stairs and heads to the front row and throws up a prayer shawl. Well, my whole team just went ballistic. We just knew this was a terrorist and she was wearing a vest. So we basically surrounded her. And then we come to find out she just didn't understand Corinthians and that she didn't have to have her head covered to pray. Well, that was our bad. We made a huge presumption. We weren't really observing. We had in our mindset what a terrorist looked like. And this little blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl was a terrorist all of a sudden because she put up a prayer shawl. She wasn't chanting anything, but it was a presumption. So we have to get out of that mindset of thinking we know what's coming at us. Something that, and again, this has all been weaved throughout this conference. Greg talked about it, Scott talked about it, Randy talked about it. A DLR. What's a DLR? This doesn't look right. So everybody knows what a DLR is, right? Do you? Do you have a bias as to what a DLR is? Do you think you might have some preconceived notions of what doesn't look right? You know, if all of us walked into your church, how many of us would be a DLR? I can see 4 or 5 right now that I think you might feel was a DLR. Riley alone, he just stands out. But my point is that we need to identify things that not only don't look right, but what are we really looking at and why? All threats are not created equal. What are we afraid of? What are we afraid of walking in the church? The bad guys. That's a DLR, right? But we don't know what they look like. Again, March of last year, everybody was a DLR that walked to my church because they had a mask on. Why? Because they had a mask? They're a DLR because I couldn't identify their... I had to change the way I looked at things. I had to observe differently. I had to go with what Mike was saying and really start focusing on whole body, hands, demeanor. Now, I even did an experiment in my own bathroom, put on a mask, and made about 60 different facial expressions. I could not tell any difference in my eyes. I could want to kiss you or shoot you. It didn't matter. My eyes stayed the same. So I realized that's not going to work. So then I have to start looking at that whole person. And we're going to talk about whole person in a minute. But you have to get out of your biases. But what are we looking for? We're looking for vandals. But as Chuck said, we're more about people than property, right? We're looking for thieves. We don't want people stealing our stuff, especially if we're there and it's on our watch. Kidnappers, we don't want our children taken, even by their own parents, because maybe it's not supposed to be happening. Child molesters. Greg scared the crap out of me. I don't know about you guys, but I thought we had great policies in place. Now I'm thinking we don't have any. So we need to relook at that. Violent disruptors. The guys I was telling you about, the one of 2 times I put my hand on my gun ever. These guys stood up in the middle of the service and started, 2 guys, 2 brothers, both criminally insane, stood up and started shouting profanities at the pastor. Well, we got them out in the parking lot. Frisco PD was on the way, and all of a sudden they started running their car towards one of my guys. He's a deputy sheriff for Dallas, and he's ready to go. I mean, we all thought this was ready to go. They stopped, they threw open the doors, and then he got out and started yelling at me. But that was a violent disruptor. We had a plan, though. We knew what we were going to do. Pastor didn't miss a beat. He was just kind of like, oh, you got this. And then he kept on. And of course, the active shooter, our worst case scenario, our nightmares. We don't ever want to deal with that. But then you have to ask the question, okay, the masks are off. What's a DLR look like? They look like Chuck, most of them. Look like The Shining? Perhaps. Look like a Cub Scout leader? You guys think this is a DLR? Yes, no? Come on. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, 17 deaths. A college professor. You'd probably take his class, right? Uh-huh. You know who this is? Ted Bundy. Killed 37 women. A soldier, we talked about this earlier. U.S. Army Major Nadal Malik. 43 victims, 13 killed at Fort Hood. And the guy next door, your neighbor. You watched him grow up. Good looking kid, right? That's Jeffrey Dahmer. He had an interesting appetite. So, all that to say, these are all serial killers. Virginia Tech shooter, the clown, Oklahoma City bombing, Aurora, we talked about. If these guys walked into your church, they wouldn't look any different than you out here. We can't put them in a hole and say, this is what a DLR is. This is what a bad guy looks like. Because we have no idea. We have to look at the whole picture. We have to look at everything else. I forgot who talked about this, reverse engineering. I think it was, I don't remember. I think it was Greg. No, it wasn't Greg, it was Scott. So reverse engineering. We have to look at what that is. Well, reverse engineering is the act of dismantling whatever you have and figuring out how to put it back together. So what I mean by this is kind of scenario based. You need to take a problem and then work backwards to find the solution to that problem. What if analysis, scenario based planning. What if analysis. What if this happened? Then I have to work backwards. What if James rushed the stage? Well, how did I plan for that ahead of time? Do I have a plan? Yeah, Mike's going to tackle him before he gets to me. That's the plan. I have to work backwards. If the fire alarm goes off, how am I going to get everybody out of the building in time? Well, I've planned for it. I have to work backwards to find the solution, and that's just reverse engineering. The other things that were talked about in much great detail by Randy as well as Dan a minute ago is, excuse me, my thing's not working well. Learning to recognize nonverbal communication. We saw a slide up here yesterday. The average face has 250,000 micro-expressions. I can't even fathom having to figure that out or how they figured that out. You know, I've got basically, my wife will tell you two, hungry and angry. So, but we have to continually learn to read people, the whole person. Criminals read our body language. The bad guys read us. They see if we're relaxed. They see if we're in the yellow zone or the white zone and zoned out. They see if we're prepared or not prepared. As they said, they'll check you out. You know, when they check us out, we're a hard target too. We're probably one of the harder targets in Frisco. But we've had people checking us out, and you know who they are because they show up and they're looking everywhere. We had one guy came in, looked around, sat kind of in the middle up, put down a briefcase in the aisle next to him, scooted over a seat. Pretty soon we were all pretty much around him, and he looked at it and he realized, he moved back to his original seat, got the briefcase and left. He was testing us out. And we tested okay to him. He didn't ever come back. But bad guys are looking at us and reading our language, so we need to learn to read theirs as well. Again, left of bank, Patrick Van Horn says, somewhere between 60 and 90% of all communication is nonverbal. I think that, who was it? Randy yesterday said only 7% of any communication is verbal, so they're on the same wavelength. If you're making a decision absent of 60 to 90% of everything you could gather, how good of a decision is that? Is that good judgment? It's misinformation. So we need to gather more information. We need to learn to read body language a little better. This is the quote I just read, by the way. We need to look at nonverbal communication as a whole thing in itself. The appearance, the vocals, the kinesics, the proxemics, which is space between us, somebody getting really close to us or trying to avoid us. The haptics, what are they doing with their hands and their face? The chronemics, I can't even pronounce that. I don't even know what that is. The artifacts, what are they wearing? You know, the white settlement thing. Guy came in in drag, basically, dressed up differently. You know, and I'm not trying to armchair that, but how did they miss that? I can't imagine I would miss that. But we're looking at the whole person. So we have to recognize that so much of what we see is nonverbal communication. You know, you can, again, there's only two women in here, so I'm going to use men pretty much. Sorry, girls. When your wife's pissed off, do you know it without her saying a word? That's nonverbal communication. So we need to recognize this in others as well. When people walk in and they're angry, Chuck drilled this into me 9 years ago. You know, smile friendly. What did you call it years ago? What? Aggressive friendliness. I can't do that. I'm just not that person. I try and it just didn't come out well. Hi. But we need to figure out why somebody's not smiling. And if you go up and engage somebody in a conversation and they're stoic and they won't smile or they won't shake your hand, there's something wrong. Now, does that mean they're a bad guy? No. It could mean their wife's still sitting in the car and they had a bad trip on the way to church. But it could mean something. So all of a sudden now, I'm just going to keep an eye on him, okay? Or maybe I'm going to have somebody else keep an eye on him. We have those all the time. We're like, could somebody keep an eye on this guy? And we will for a while. And he'll be sitting there. All of a sudden his wife will walk in and sit down and he's like, oh, okay, now I'm good. You know, so you just have to watch a little bit longer. You have to recognize, what is this body language? What's the face saying? What's the, you know, tenseness saying? Is it that he's a bad guy or he's having a really bad morning? So we have to be aware of those things. So we have to hone and practice our observation skills. A security guard, and I think there was a movie even to this effect, observe and protect. That's kind of our thing, observe and protect, right? That's kind of the mantra of the security industry. But if we're not observing, we really can't protect. It's the most common saying in this industry, observe and protect. Yet, and Chuck does a little better job of it, but I've looked up security training all over the country. This is not really a regular course. This is not, what they're training on is all the hard skills, the gun stuff, the defensive tactics, the how to do this and how to be cool and how to, be a great bodyguard and whatever. They're not talking about this, how to observe. If you've ever done, and Nate Dogg has, executive protection, you got to be reading a whole lot more than the average person. We did a drill where the bad guy came at our pastor with a knife. He was smiling all the way there until 5 feet, and then out came the knife, the face changed. And we acted well. We actually succeeded in that drill. We fail at most. But you have to be prepared. You have to be ready to read instantaneously what's going on around you. You can't make presumptions anymore. Somebody's going to get hurt. We have to be students of people. We have to observe. We have to detect. So ask yourself, if you're training your people, maybe you can find a good training course. Kind of, lay up a scenario, imagine scenario, tabletop, they call them in emergency management, and then ask the questions. What direction did the offender go? He went out that door. Well, which way is that? Well, unless I'm turned around, that's west. Were they right or left-handed? Well, that's a great question. What was their predominant movements with the right or left hand? Did they have any tattoos? I don't know. They were wearing a shirt. What color was the shirt? Dark. It's not really a shirt color, but sure. What else were they wearing? Were they wearing boots, shoes? So we don't pick up on a lot of this. My greatest challenge at my church is we've never actually lost a kid, but at least once a month we misplace one for a minute. And so my first thing whenever they say, Michael, we need you in the kids area, I know right away they've misplaced a child. And my first question is, what did he look like? Was about this tall, okay? And it was a boy, okay, we're getting somewhere. What was he wearing? A shirt and shorts. People don't, even when they're in their care, they're not paying attention to what's going on. If somebody said they misplaced James, I'd say he's in a red t-shirt and blue shorts. And he needs to shave his legs. But we need to be aware of the little things, the nuances, the details. And we need to train on that. Throw up a picture like I did, but like a real person, leave it up for 10 seconds, take it down, and ask your people to describe that. My law enforcement brothers will say, witnesses are horrible at describing people and things around them because we see things through our own lens and a bias. I've talked to people and they said, well, it was a black guy. I said, really? Because the guy sitting over there that is handcuffed is brown. Are you sure? Oh, no, that's him. Okay. You had a bias there, right? So you can do a lot of things. Scan crowds, go places, look for things. Even in your own church, you can, sit up near the stage and look out, see the whole crowd. You can go to a mall. Malls are really fun to watch people, and you can make a game out of it. You can make a test out of it. How many people can I see, how many guys, and again, forgive me, ladies, how many guys that are holding their wife's hands are checking out other girls? That's a fun game, and you'll get a high score. So there's a lot of things you can do. One trick, a buddy of mine in Secret Service taught me when I scan a crowd, same way I read, left to right. That's just kind of our natural thing. We do everything left to right. That's our country, right? He said, start doing it right to left, and you'll be amazed at what you pick out. So I started doing that. I was like, oh, I didn't see him a minute ago. Oh, wow, he's sitting over there. Because our brain has to work differently when we take it out of the same mindset we've been in forever. We're taught at a very young age, do everything left to right. And so I don't know about left-handed people. Vic, do you look at things differently? Nope, left to right, yep. That's just the way we're taught. So we have to break out of that mold. Go to a concert, go to a park, go to an airport. Watch people. You will start to pick up on the little things. You'll start to be able to recognize body language and facial expressions and be able to make up stories in your head as to what's really going on with that. You probably won't really know. but it's worth looking at. To Mike Valka, excuse me, you have to look at the whole person. There's so many things on any given person that you have to watch and look at and understand. Are they talking to themselves? Is what they're wearing not appropriate for the season? Are they smiling? Are they frowning? If you engage them, are they responsive? Whole person. And then hands and waist and demeanor. But you have to start here at that whole person. I have another test for you. This is one of my favorites to do with my team. Kim's game. Anybody ever heard of this? Nobody really in the entire room has heard of this game? Okay, well, Rudyard Kipling had it in his novel Kim, which is older than most of us in here. The hero, training as a spy, played this game. So we're going to play it, same 10 seconds. And what it is, I'm going to throw up 10 objects. And you can write them down. You can try to memorize them. You have 10 seconds. And then I'm going to ask you to tell me what all was up there. Okay, everybody ready for this? You sure? Okay, here we go. Okay, I covered it up. Anybody want to take a stab at it? James?
Okay, brain, bullet, knife, tar pit, you got a keychain or a sheriff's badge with it.
Yep.
Like a little chip, like a poker chip.
Good.
A whistle. And then there was a thing on top that looked kind of like back and tell what it was. It was like on the top.
Okay. Anybody else get anything above and beyond that? Fingernail clippers with the thing at the top. What else? What? I still can't hear you.
I saw a marble.
A marble, yes. You haven't lost them. It was there.
Tell my wife that.
What? I'll write you a note. What else? He mentioned that, but yes, casino chip. Anybody see the bullet? Okay. Anybody see the rock? What was on the rock?
It was gray.
It had a word. That's okay. Be still. That's kind of hard to see. It's upside down. Have you ever had to look at things in a different way? Anyway, the whole point of this, and you just awesome, by the way. What church do you go to?
Lindale Church.
So when you move to the Metroplex, Preston Trails in Frisco, come on up. I know Lindale. But the whole point of this is we're training our brain. We're training ourselves to look at things quickly and make some decisions as to what they are. And you guys did good. My team, about half the time, because I have a whole box of stuff for this game, and I'll just randomly put stuff and test them on it and see how they do, and then I'll change it up, and we'll keep playing this till somebody gets it all, and then they get to buy the beer. So it's a fun game. You have to trust your senses as well. We have more than the 5 that they told us in elementary school. We have a 6th sense, especially if you're in this world. You have a 6th sense. If you're a Christian, you have a 6th sense. Sight, smell, sound, taste, touch, and intuition. That gut feeling that something might be wrong. This feeling is often the most reliable because our biases may tell us something different. Our gut feeling may override those conscious decisions and tell us, hey, you need to get out of this situation. Anybody ever heard of the book, Gift of Fear? Okay, it's a great read. Gavin DeBecker, great guy, great writer. He says, you have the gift of a brilliant internal guardian that stands ready to warn you of hazards and guide you through risky situations. You know what we call this in the church world? Yes, the Holy Spirit. We receive that. He prays on our behalf. He tells us things. That is our inner voice. That is our intuition. I'm not a theologian either, so don't go get me in trouble. But if there is a small voice saying something's not going to work, listen to it. We've all watched the scary movies and we're all going, don't open the door. because we know on the other side is the guy with a leather mask and a chainsaw. Listen to that. Don't just run aimlessly into it. Kind of a couple final thoughts here because I know I'm running close on time. Your body can't go where your mind has not been. You're gonna freeze. If you've not thought through some scenarios, if you've not thought through situations, your body's not gonna go. If your brain hasn't thought through, run towards the shots, your body's not gonna do it. It's gonna go, I don't know what to do. But if you've thought through, there's a bad guy, he's shooting people, I'm going after that, your body will go. But if you haven't thought through it, that's a challenge. You need to visualize different scenarios. You need to run through this stuff in your head. Repetition and training develops memory. Memory fosters confidence. Confidence fosters decisiveness and good decision making with speed. So run through these things. Maybe I'm weird in my thinking, but when I'm sitting covering the pastor, sitting on the second row, usually kind of where I can see at about a 90-degree angle, I'm running through scenarios. If somebody comes from the stage that way, I'm going to send this person to him. If somebody runs down the middle, I'm also looking what's going on in the back. And I run through these things so that I have a response. And if you're not doing that, when it happens, you're going to be too late to respond. During training, I presume they still show them where pastors are getting punched and things are being thrown and hitting them. If you're not quick enough, you can't respond quickly if you're not mentally prepared. I've had arguments over the last 9 years since we created our team with our pastors. They would like us about 50 feet away. I would like us about 2. So we have to come to a compromise. And I've shown them studies that I've created. More than 12 feet, we can't save you. Okay, be 12 feet. So that means 9. And so we have to be close enough that we can respond. So that's how my brain trains, is to respond to all the possible things that might happen. And I'm constantly learning. Self-study. Whoever mentioned that, I guess whoever was up here second to last. Dan. Yeah, Dan. Self-study, that's huge. We should all be doing that. I homeschooled all 4 of my kids. And I'm big on self-education. I'm big on doing it yourself at home, not relying on others to do it for you. We need to do group training. We need to do team training. But there's also some training we need to do ourselves. He had 4 books. I've got a book list on my handout that our team library, now we have more because I bought some, but you have to engage in awareness drills that will train your brain to be aware of the things your subconscious is not necessarily going to pick up on. You have to practice these drills. You have to use your peripheral vision. You have to practice using that. Use reflective surfaces. I'm always doing that. If I'm in a room and I have to turn my back on the room, I'm hoping there's some glass that I can see what's going on behind me. I have to visualize the threat in order to overcome the threat. That is tactical awareness. That is making a difference. And we do all this because, and I forgot who mentioned that. I tried to write all these things down as they were happening. I know Nate mentioned it a little bit, and Dan mentioned some. What do we call police and fire? First responders. Why do we call them that? Because they respond. They've had training. They know how to attack the situation. We don't have first reactor teams that I'm aware of, but yet if we're not trained, if we're not training ourselves, we're reacting. Reacting is rarely good. Reacting usually ends up bad. A reaction is just an instant decision based on a lot of biases, our unconscious mind, our prejudices, and it's a defense mechanism. We're reacting. We react to somebody gets in our face. Oh yeah, come on, bring it. That's not good. That's not ever going to do anything. A response, on the other hand, comes more slowly. It's based on knowledge, based on training, based on thinking it through beforehand. so that you can respond well and not just react. I pray and wish the best for every one of you. I pray and wish that you will continue to educate yourselves. As I said, there's a reading list in my little handout for you. Those are all great books. You may not think so, but some of them are great. You may give that list to your team and see if they want to look at some of them. But I want you guys to be as mindful and aware as possible, because I don't want you to be this guy. My final thought: in order to protect the sheep, sometimes you have to think like the wolf. And this is what I go through with our kids ministry, our creative department. You know, they'll throw out, hey, we're going to do this. And I'm like, well, what about? And they're like, God, you're so dark. I'm like, well, yeah, because I'm thinking like the wolf. We had Global Leadership Summit at our church Thursday and Friday. We have a kid care area. They decided they were going to do a water day outside with hundreds of people I've never seen. And I'm like, that was the worst idea ever. What if, and I started putting the what ifs, and they're like, God, you're dark. I'm like, yes, I'm protecting your children. Because in order to protect the sheep, I have to think like a wolf, as do you. And I'm not asking you to go to the dark places, because it can be scary sometimes. But if you aren't thinking about them, you're not going to respond well. So here's the book list. It's on there. Thank you for your time. Are there any questions? I didn't actually leave room for that, but Chuck's not all the way up here yet. My team is, we have 2 campuses. My primary team is about 30 people, but that includes 4 full-time medical. I have a doctor, 2 paramedics, and a trauma nurse.
How many are armed?
There are, any given time, about 6 of us are armed. The rest are eyes and ears. Somebody else had a question? Okay, well, there you go. Except the sniper up on the loft.
Any other questions about anything that